where faith, inspiration, and storytelling come together to bring the Bible to life like never before. Our mission is to take you on a spiritual journey through the Bible's stories, from the creation in Genesis to the revelations of the end times. Welcome to Timeless Bible Journeys.
Have you ever wondered what it takes to change the course of history? To stand against an empire, defy a king, and lead an entire nation to freedom? Some figures in history leave behind wealth or monuments, but others, like Moses, leave behind something far greater. A legacy that spans thousands of years, shaping the laws, faith, and very identity of millions across the world. Moses is more than just a name in ancient texts. He is a central figure in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. A prophet, a lawgiver, a leader, a man chosen by God to perform miracles, to challenge the greatest ruler of his time, and to bring his people from slavery to salvation. His story is filled with mystery, divine intervention, and moments of breathtaking courage. But here's the big question. Who was Moses really? Was he a real historical figure, or is his story just a legend passed down through generations? Did he actually part the Red Sea, receive the Ten Commandments, and speak directly with God? Or is there another explanation behind the miracles and myths? Today we're diving deep into the life of Moses. Not just the religious figure, but the man behind the miracles. We'll explore his incredible journey from a hidden baby in a basket to the leader of a revolution. A lawmaker who changed the moral foundations of the world, and ultimately, a figure whose death remains shrouded in mystery. So stay with me, because this isn't just a story from the past. It's a story of faith, power, and the enduring struggle for freedom. And by the end of this video, you might just see Moses in a whole new light. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into history's most fascinating figures. Now, let's step into the world of Moses. The birth of a leader. Our story begins in the ancient land of Egypt, an empire of towering pyramids, powerful gods, and a pharaoh who ruled with absolute authority. But beneath the splendor and wealth of Egypt, there was suffering. The Israelites, descendants of Abraham, had lived in Egypt for generations. Once welcomed as guests, they had now become slaves. Their numbers grew, and Pharaoh, fearing an uprising, issued a cruel and devastating decree. Every newborn Hebrew boy must be drowned in the Nile River. It was a command meant to erase a generation before it could rise. But one mother refused to accept this fate. A woman named Jochebed gave birth to a baby boy, a child she knew was special. For 3 months, she hid him, keeping him safe from Pharaoh's soldiers. But she knew she couldn't hide him forever. Desperate to save her son, she made a choice no mother should ever have to make. She placed him in a small basket, carefully sealing it with tar and pitch to keep it afloat. Then, with a silent prayer, she set the basket adrift on the Nile, entrusting her child's fate to the river and, perhaps, to something greater. The tiny basket floated past reeds and crocodiles, carried by the current until it reached a place no one could have predicted, the royal palace. There, among the gardens of Pharaoh, the basket was discovered by an unlikely rescuer, Pharaoh's own daughter. When she opened the basket, the baby's cries melted her heart. She knew he was a Hebrew child, one of the very ones her father had ordered to be killed. But instead of obeying, she defied the decree. She took the child as her own and named him Moses, meaning drawn out of the water. But here's the twist. In a remarkable turn of fate, Moses' sister, Miriam, who had secretly followed the basket, stepped forward and offered to find a nurse for the child. That nurse? none other than Jochebed, Moses' own mother. For a few precious years, Moses was raised by his true family, learning about his Hebrew heritage, the stories of his ancestors, and the faith of his people. But soon he was taken back to the palace where he was raised as an Egyptian prince. He grew up surrounded by wealth, power, and privilege, learning the ways of the royal court, trained in leadership, strategy, and the knowledge of the most advanced civilization of the time. But despite his royal status, something inside him never truly belonged. Moses was caught between two worlds, raised as an Egyptian, but forever tied to the people of Israel. And one day, that internal conflict would reach a breaking point, one that would change his life and the course of history forever. A crime that changed history. For years, Moses lived a life of privilege. He walked through the grand halls of Pharaoh's palace, dined with nobles, and was educated in the wisdom of Egypt, the most advanced civilization of its time. He wore the fine linens of royalty, spoke the language of power, and was trained in leadership and strategy. To the outside world, he was an Egyptian prince, but deep inside, he was something more, something different. Despite his royal upbringing, Moses couldn't ignore the suffering of the Hebrew people, the people of his true heritage. He saw them toiling in the scorching sun, building the very empire that enslaved them. He saw the whips of their taskmasters, the bruises on their backs, the exhaustion in their eyes, and something inside him began to stir. Then came the moment that changed everything. One day, as Moses walked through the fields, he saw an Egyptian taskmaster viciously beating a Hebrew slave. The blows were relentless. The cries of pain echoed in the air. Moses froze, watching, his heart pounding, his fists clenching. And then he snapped. Overcome with rage, Moses lunged forward. Before he could even think, he struck the Egyptian. Once, twice. The man collapsed. Blood pooled in the dust. The taskmaster was dead. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, realization hit. Moses had just committed murder. His heart raced. He looked around. Had anyone seen? He quickly buried the body in the sand, hoping no one would find out. But secrets never stay buried for long. The next day, he saw two Hebrew men arguing. Trying to mediate, he stepped in, saying, "Why are you fighting your own brother?" One of the men turned to him and said something that sent a chill down his spine. "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" Panic set in. The news had spread. And if the Hebrews knew, then Pharaoh would know. Moses had no choice. He had to run. That night, he fled the only life he had ever known. He ran from the palace, from Egypt, from his past. The Prince of Egypt became a fugitive, a man with no home, no power, and no future. He wandered into the desert, where the golden sands stretched endlessly before him, each step taking him further away from the world he once belonged to. But what seemed like the end of his story was only the beginning, because in the wilderness, Moses would find something greater than a throne. He would find his true calling, and he would come face to face with the divine. The burning bush, a call from the divine. Moses had been a prince, a man of power, of status, but now he was nothing more than a wanderer, a fugitive lost in the vast wilderness. For days he traveled under the scorching sun, his throat dry, his body weak. Eventually he found refuge in the land of Midian, where he was taken in by Jethro, a Midianite priest. Over time he married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and built a new life as a shepherd. Gone were the silk robes of Egypt. Now he wore the simple garments of a herdsman. The royal halls were replaced with open plains. The shouts of servants were replaced by the quiet sounds of sheep. For 40 years, Moses lived in exile. Egypt was just a distant memory. He had accepted his fate, or so he thought. One day, as he led his flock to the slopes of Mount Horeb, something caught his eye, a strange glow flickering in the distance. As he drew closer, he saw it clearly. A bush, burning with fire, but not consumed by it. The flames danced, yet the branches did not turn to ash. It defied reason, defied nature. And then, a voice, deep, powerful, commanding, called his name. Moses, Moses. Moses froze, his heart pounded. He had seen many things in his life, but never this. Trembling, he stepped forward. "Here I am," he whispered. The voice spoke again. "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Moses slowly removed his sandals, feeling the sacred earth beneath his feet. Then the voice revealed itself. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." A wave of fear and awe washed over Moses. He fell to his knees, hiding his face. He knew he was standing in the presence of the divine. Then came the command that would change the course of history. "I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries, and I have come to rescue them. Now I am sending you to Pharaoh. You will lead my people out of Egypt." Moses' eyes widened. Him? Return to Egypt? Stand before Pharaoh? Lead an entire nation to freedom? It was impossible. "Who am I to do this?" he asked. But God's answer was simple. "I will be with you." Still, Moses hesitated. What if they don't believe me? What if they ask for your name? The voice replied with words that would echo through eternity. "I am who I am. The name of God. A name without limits. A name that declared absolute power and existence." Yet, even in the presence of such might, Moses doubted. He argued, "I am not a good speaker. I am slow of speech and tongue." But God had already decided. "Your brother Aaron will speak for you. Now go." There was no turning back. Moses, the fugitive, the shepherd, the man who had once run from his past, was now chosen for the greatest mission of his life. He would return to the land he had fled. He would stand before Pharaoh, and he would demand, "In the name of the Almighty, let my people go." The 10 plagues and the Exodus. With nothing but a staff in his hand and faith in his heart, Moses returned to Egypt, the land he had fled so many years ago. But this time he wasn't just a runaway, he was a man on a mission, carrying the command of the Almighty himself. Standing before Pharaoh, the ruler of the greatest empire on earth, Moses spoke words that would shake the foundations of history. "Let my people go." Pharaoh scoffed. Who was this shepherd to make demands of a king? He refused, tightening his grip on the Israelite slaves. And then the plagues began. One by one, Egypt was struck by disasters so devastating, so unnatural, that they could not be ignored. 1. The Nile turned to blood. The lifeblood of Egypt, its great river, ran red, undrinkable and foul. Fish died, the land stank, and fear began to creep in. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. 2. A plague of frogs. They swarmed the cities, filling homes, covering streets, invading every corner of life. 3. Gnats filled the air, tiny insects, relentless and suffocating, covering both man and beast. 4. Swarms of flies. The skies darkened as flies infested everything, bringing disease and chaos. 5. A deadly disease struck livestock. Egypt's cattle, sheep, and horses perished, crippling the economy. 6. Boils covered the people. Painful sores erupted across the land, sparing no one, not even Pharaoh's own court. 7. Hail rained down with fire. Ice and flames fell from the sky, crushing crops, shattering homes, and terrifying the people. 8. Locusts devoured the fields. Anything left standing was consumed, leaving Egypt in utter devastation. 9. Darkness covered the land. For 3 days, a heavy, unnatural darkness smothered Egypt. No sun, no stars. A silence filled with fear. Yet through all of this, Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go. His pride, his stubbornness, his belief in his own power kept him from surrendering. And so the final plague came, the most devastating of all, the death of the firstborn. On that fateful night, every firstborn in Egypt, from the son of Pharaoh to the son of a servant, perished. But in the homes of the Israelites, there was no death, no sorrow, for they had followed Moses' instructions. They had sacrificed a lamb and marked their doorposts with its blood. And when the angel of death passed through the land, it passed over those homes, sparing them. That night broke Pharaoh. His son was gone, his kingdom was in ruins. He could fight no longer. At last he let them go. The Israelites, after centuries of slavery, walked free. Over 600,000 men, along with women and children, marched out of Egypt, led by Moses, following a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. But Pharaoh's pride would not let them go so easily. He sent his army in pursuit, chasing them down to the shores of the Red Sea. Trapped between the water and the most powerful army in the world, the Israelites cried out in fear, but Moses, standing at the edge of the sea, lifted his staff. And then the impossible happened. The waters parted, towering walls of liquid on either side, creating a dry path through the sea. The Israelites crossed, stepping into their newfound freedom. And when the Egyptian army followed, the waters crashed down, swallowing them whole. With Egypt behind them and the promised land ahead, the Israelites were finally free. But their journey was far from over. The parting of the Red Sea. The night air was thick with fear. The Israelites, newly freed from centuries of slavery, stood trapped between an unstoppable force and an unmovable barrier. Before them, the vast Red Sea stretched endlessly, its dark waves crashing against the shore. Behind them, the thunder of Pharaoh's army grew louder, chariots racing, swords gleaming, the battle-hardened soldiers of Egypt closing in. Panic spread like wildfire. "Why did you bring us here, Moses?" the people cried. "Were there not enough graves in Egypt that we must die here in the wilderness?" Moses, standing tall amidst the chaos, did not waver. He turned his gaze toward the heavens, and then he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring today. The Egyptians you see before you, you will never see again." A silence fell over the crowd. The only sound was the pounding of horses' hooves in the distance. Then Moses raised his staff. A great wind howled through the night, fierce and powerful, churning the waters before them. Suddenly, the sea, so vast, so unyielding, began to move. The waves split apart, rising into massive walls of water on either side. Between them, a dry path stretched into the distance, cutting through the sea like a road of salvation. A miracle, a moment beyond reason. Moses turned to the people. "Go!" The Israelites hesitated for only a second before stepping forward, first in disbelief, then in desperation. Families clutched their children close as they walked between the towering waters. Shepherds urged their flocks onward. The elderly leaned on their staffs, pressing forward step by step. The sea, which had once been their prison, had now become their escape. Behind them, Pharaoh and his army charged forward, unwilling to accept defeat. They stormed into the parted waters, their chariots rolling over the seabed, their swords ready to strike. But then, something changed. The wheels of their chariots jammed. The ground beneath them became heavy, sinking, shifting. Fear crept into the hearts of even the mightiest warriors. "Let us turn back," they cried. "The Lord is fighting for them." But it was too late. As the last Israelite stepped onto dry land, Moses turned once more toward the sea. He stretched out his staff, and the waters, which had stood like walls, now came crashing down. A deafening roar filled the air as the sea reclaimed its place. Chariots, horses, and soldiers vanished beneath the waves. The might of Egypt was swallowed whole, erased in an instant. And then, silence. The Israelites stood in awe, gazing at the sea that had once been their grave, but had now become their salvation. A moment of disbelief, then joy, then an overwhelming flood of emotion. They were free, truly free. A song rose among them, a song of victory, of deliverance, of faith. Miriam, the sister of Moses, took a tambourine and led the women in dance, singing, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." The Red Sea had parted. The impossible had happened. And Moses, once a fugitive, once a man of doubt, had become the leader of a free nation. But their journey was far from over. The wilderness awaited. The promised land was still a distant dream, and greater challenges lay ahead. The laws that shaped civilization. The Red Sea had closed behind them. Egypt was now just a memory. But freedom alone was not enough. The Israelites had escaped slavery, but they were still a people without order, without structure, without a true identity. And so their journey took them to a mountain, Mount Sinai, a towering, rugged peak in the heart of the wilderness. It was here, in the silence of the desert, that the next chapter of Moses' mission would unfold. The Israelites camped at the foot of the mountain, restless, uncertain. They had seen the power of the Almighty with their own eyes, the plagues, the parting of the sea, their deliverance. But now, they waited for something more. Then, the mountain trembled. A great cloud descended, thick and heavy, covering the peak in fire and smoke. Thunder roared, lightning cracked through the sky, and then, amidst the chaos, came a voice. Moses alone was called to ascend. Step by step, he climbed into the unknown, vanishing into the mist. For 40 days and 40 nights, Moses remained on the mountain, face to face with the divine. And when he returned, he carried with him 2 stone tablets, etched by the very hand of God. Upon them were 10 commandments, laws that would not only guide Israel, but shape the moral foundation of civilizations for millennia to come. 1. You shall have no other gods before me. 2. You shall not make for yourself an idol. 3. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. 4. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 5. Honor your father and mother. 6. You shall not murder. 7. You shall not commit adultery. 8. You shall not steal. 9. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. 10. You shall not covet what belongs to others. These were more than just rules. They were a covenant, a divine contract between God and his people. Yet, even as Moses held these sacred laws in his hands, the Israelites below had already turned away. In his absence, impatience had overtaken them. They had melted their gold, crafting a statue of a calf, a false god to worship. When Moses saw this, his fury was uncontrollable. The very people who had been delivered from Egypt, who had witnessed miracles beyond imagination, had already broken their promise. In his anger, Moses threw the tablets to the ground, shattering them. But God, in his mercy, allowed Moses to return to the mountain. Once again, the commandments were given, this time rewritten by Moses himself. And from that moment on, Israel was bound by law, not just laws of worship, but laws of justice, morality, and governance. Beyond the 10 Commandments, Moses delivered an entire legal system. Laws about fairness, about protecting the poor, about how to treat one another with dignity and respect. Laws that set the Israelites apart from every other nation. These laws would go on to influence countless societies, from ancient kingdoms to modern democracies. They laid the groundwork for human rights, for justice systems, for the very concept of ethical responsibility. Moses was no longer just a leader. He had become a lawgiver. The Israelites now had their freedom, and they had their laws. But their journey was far from over. The promised land still lay ahead, and the greatest trials were yet to come. The end of an era. For 40 years, the Israelites wandered through the wilderness. 40 years of trials, of hardships, of learning what it truly meant to be a free people. They faced hunger and thirst, yet manna fell from the heavens and water flowed from the rock. They encountered enemies, yet they prevailed through divine intervention. They doubted, they rebelled, they questioned, but through it all, Moses led them. He was more than just a leader now. He was their prophet, their lawgiver, their connection to the Almighty. But even the greatest of leaders are not without flaws. One day, as the people cried out for water in their frustration, Moses, weary and exasperated, struck a rock in anger instead of speaking to it as God had commanded. Water gushed forth, but in that moment, Moses had disobeyed. It was a small act in the eyes of men, but before God, it was enough. The verdict was clear. Moses would see the promised land, but he would never enter it. As the years passed, the Israelites finally reached the border of Canaan, the land promised to their ancestors. Victory was within reach, but Moses knew his journey had come to an end. He climbed to the top of Mount Nebo, his eyes sweeping over the vast land stretching before him. He saw the valleys, the rivers, the hills that his people would soon call home, but he would not walk among them. There, on the mountain, God spoke to him one last time. "This is the land I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over." At 120 years old, Moses was still strong. His eyes had not dimmed, nor had his strength failed him. But his time had come. Alone with his Creator, Moses took his final breath. And then he was gone. No one knows where he was buried. No tomb was built. No monument was raised. It was as if the earth itself had hidden him, leaving behind only his legacy. But his impact was far greater than a grave could ever hold. He had taken a people bound in chains and led them to freedom. He had stood before kings, spoken with God, and shaped the moral laws that would guide humanity for generations. His name would be written in Scripture, spoken in prayers, and remembered across faiths and cultures for thousands of years. And though Moses did not enter the promised land, his mission was complete. His people would go forward, and history would never forget him. The legacy of Moses. Moses may have left this world on the slopes of Mount Nebo, but his legacy has never faded. More than 3,000 years later, his name still echoes across cultures, religions, and history books. He is a central figure in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, revered not just as a prophet, but as a lawgiver, a liberator, and a man who walked with God. His story of faith, defiance, miracles, and moral law has shaped the world in ways few other figures ever have. The 10 Commandments, given through Moses, became the foundation of morality and justice. They influenced not only religious teachings but also the laws of nations, forming the ethical backbone of Western civilization. Concepts like justice, personal responsibility, and the sanctity of human life trace back to the laws delivered by Moses. Beyond religion, Moses' story has inspired countless works of art, literature, and film. From Michelangelo's famous statue to Hollywood epics, his journey continues to capture the imagination of every generation. His tale is more than just history. It is a symbol of perseverance, faith, and the struggle for freedom. But Moses' greatest legacy isn't in books or statues. It lives on in the millions of people who look to him as a guide, as proof that one person, with faith and courage, can change the course of history. He was not a king. He never built an empire. He never sat on a throne. Yet, through him, nations were born. His life may have ended at the edge of the Promised Land, but his story will never end. Moses was, and remains, one of the most enduring figures in human history. The question is, what do you believe? Let us know in the comments. Was Moses a historical figure, a prophet, or something more? And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories from history, faith, and beyond. Until next time, keep seeking the truth.